So, climate change. Has anybody ever heard that word before?
Yes, miss.
Yes, miss.
Awesome. So, when you think of climate change, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
When there's too much smoke in the air and places that are supposed to be cold become warm.
So, Daniel says rising temperatures. Okay. So, global warming and climate change. Um, Global warming contributes to climate change, but let's jump right in. So, global warming is the long-term rise in average temperatures of the Earth's climate, right? It is a major aspect of climate change. So, global warming is self-explanatory. The globe is warming, it's getting warmer. Global warming is mainly human caused increase in global surface temperatures, while climate change includes both global warming and its effects, such as changes in precipitation, right? So climate change is measured by the changes in climate indicators like temperature, precipitation, and wind. And here's a brief definition of climate change. Climate change is a change in global or regional climate patterns, right? In particular, a change apparent from the mid to late 20th century onwards and attributed largely to the increased levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide produced by the use of fossil fuels. Okay, so next slide, please. Let's get more into what climate change is. So climate change is actually something that's natural. Have you ever watched Ice Age?
Some of us, some miss.
Ice Age. Ice Age what is a cartoon that was based off the time when, you know, they say the earth was much cooler and we had more ice all over the place. But in Ice Age, you can see that the ice is breaking apart. So and it's getting warmer in Ice Age. The climate has changed many times before. So over from the existence of Earth, we've gone through many different changes in our climate. Sometimes Earth is hotter than in some years. Sometimes the Earth is cooler in some years, and it's always fluctuating, right? Okay, from ice ages where glaciers were up to half of Europe to now where the ice has receded to the poles. This is an example of natural climate change. So it's never steady. But, next slide, please. Most of the climate change in Earth's history have been naturally caused, yes, driven by the sun or events like asteroids, crashing into the Earth's surface and making it a bit hotter. However, in the last 200 years, the responsibility of the climate change has changed, and people are now the primary cause. And can anybody guess why? Hey, go back on the other side, please. Can anybody guess why I said it on the first slide?
Because people are doing a lot of pollution.
We're burning a lot of fossil fuels that contribute to it. So if you can look at on the graph, in 1880 to about 1910, I'll put it, it used to go up and down, but there wasn't an extreme high or there wasn't an extreme high that was continuously increasing. But after 1910, we see that the temperatures keep rising, even though they drop sometimes, they keep rising to new levels, and even now, and this chart stops at 2015. 2015 was the highest that it had been on this record. So each year, the temperatures go up, fluctuate, but they're never returning to the temperatures that they were before 1920. Next slide, please. So today's climate change is largely affected by human action. The greenhouse effect is what drives global warming and therefore climate change. And the greenhouse effect is the trapping of the sun's warmth in the planet's lower atmosphere due to the greater transparency of the atmosphere to visible radiation from the sun than to infrared radiation emitted from the planet's surface. Now let's explain what that means. It basically means the greenhouse effect is the trapping of the sun's heat. So we all know that we have the ozone layer, right? The ozone layer. The rays from the sun come in through the ozone layer, and then some of the rays bounce off of the earth. The excess ones that earth doesn't necessarily need just bounce off of the earth when it comes in contact with the sea or any shinier surface. And so when it's supposed to do that, it's the warmth or the heat that's coming from the sun, is supposed to leave earth when it bounces off the sea. But let's continue to read. Increased greenhouse gases contribute to the greenhouse effect, which cause the Earth's temperatures to increase and thus causing climate change. So when we burn more fossil fuels, when we drive in the car more and it burns more fossil fuels, those greenhouse gases go up in the air. When we use certain perfumes, the greenhouse gases from that perfume goes into the air. When certain animals in large amounts, produce waste, their waste produces gases that go up in the air and contribute to, the greenhouse effect. Fact, the greenhouse gases started to increase during the Industrial Revolution. Has anybody ever heard of the Industrial Revolution? By chance? All right, so the Industrial Revolution is a period in Earth's history where we start moving from using um, less, less, well, I wouldn't say less renewable, but start using energy in larger quantities to power our machines, right? So as we started to use coal, etc., to fuel our machines, these emitted much of the greenhouse gases. So before we move to the next slide, let me make what the Industrial Revolution is much clearer. Before the Industrial Revolution, for example, we used to have, donkeys pulling the carts. Everybody was okay with riding on a horse from point A to point B. But during the Industrial Revolution, we started to have steam trains, we started to have cars, we started to have, boats that were powered by coal, etc. So once we started to do that, our carbon footprint or the amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that we were producing started to go up. And the industrial revolution started around around the late 1800s to the 1920s, but it really skyrocketed in the early 1900s. Next slide, please. All right, so where do greenhouse gas emissions come from, right? Most of them in today's world really come from the fact that we utilize fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the main reason why we have so much greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So we burn fossil fuels in order to get electricity and heat. So 25%, which is the largest amount of the greenhouse gases, are as a result of us burning fossil fuels to get electricity and heat. And then agriculture and land. So earlier I mentioned that some animals, when they make their waste, the greenhouse gases come from that. Perfect example is a cow. The cow you see here, when he eats his grass and then relieves himself, this cow's waste releases methane into the atmosphere, and methane is a greenhouse gas that has been increasing in its quantity because of agriculture and other things. But you see, the main reason, and we're not blaming individual cows, but when we have agricultural farms whose main aim is to breed cows for feed, well, not feed, but breed cows for meat, we have a large amount of methane being produced. When we have whole cow farms that breed cows for their milk, when they pass their waste, we have large amounts of methane that are being emitted from one area. And so that goes up and contributes to industry as well. So not only do we burn the oil the fossil fuels for electricity, but our industries as well are utilizing them to produce their other things. And also the industries themselves also have byproducts, greenhouse gases that they let off into the atmosphere. So methane, nitrogen oxide, and all those other chemicals go up and contribute. So transportation, there again we're using fossil fuels, and other energies also contribute to that. Food waste, when we eat certain foods and we throw them away, they break down, and the gases that are released contribute to it, and buildings as well. Next slide, please. So here are the largest amounts of greenhouse gases. So the most produced, or the most common greenhouse gas in our atmosphere is carbon dioxide, because of transport, because we're burning fossil fuels and crude oil and coal to produce electricity and energy for other reasons. And then closely behind carbon dioxide is methane. And methane is produced from agriculture, when the certain animals, relieve themselves. And natural gases also emit methane, and also landfills. So, for example, Riverton dump and other landfills across Jamaica, those would be emitting a lot. Have nitrous oxide that come from agricultural soil management. We have nitrates in fertilizers. And then we have manufacturing, cars, etc. We have HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, and then PFCs, and sulfur hexafluoride. So next slide, please. So all of these, they are released into the atmosphere and they cause havoc. So global warming and the greenhouse effect. So natural greenhouse effect. This is what's supposed to happen. If you look on the left side, as I stated before, the heat from the sun is supposed to come in, and then the excess heat is supposed to be radiated off of Earth. It's supposed to bounce off the clouds, bounce off the sea, and bounce off other areas and be deflected back into space, because we don't need all of that heat. But when we have an increased amount of the greenhouse gases, the greenhouse gases actually stop the excess heat from leaving the earth, right? And when it stops it from being deflected back into outer space, it traps it here on earth with us, and everything, all the temperatures raise, thus contributing to climate change, greenhouse effect, and global warming. Next slide, please. Okay, global warming and climate change, causes and effects. So we already went through what the causes were. We're doing all these things: agriculture, fossil fuel consumption, and deforestation, which contributes to the large amount of greenhouse gases that are present in our atmosphere. Because if we have, let me be specific about deforestation, which I didn't mention earlier. When we cut down the trees, there are less trees to do one specific thing. Can anybody tell me what the trees can't do if they don't exist? If we continue to cut them down, what happens?
Provide oxygen.
They're unable to provide oxygen, and they're
They
also
all the excess carbon dioxide.
exactly, they're unable to absorb all of the excess carbon dioxide. And if they can't absorb the excess carbon dioxide, then all the carbon dioxide is just going to be left there in the air. And there are certain other plants too that absorb more than just carbon dioxide. And when we destroy those, then we have less plants to absorb those other greenhouse gases. So when we do all of this, it causes an increase in greenhouse gases. And then an increase in greenhouse gases not only makes it harder for heat to escape the earth, but it makes the ocean more acidic. So over here we see the effects on the environment, ocean acidification. And that means when the carbon dioxide mixes when too much carbon dioxide or too much of the methane and other, gases mix into the salt water, then we have created an atmosphere that is basically full of chemicals and become acidic. It's hard for animals to live. And if animals, find it hard to live in there, then they'll perish. So ocean acidification caused by excess greenhouse gases affects water bodies, affects the ocean, affects wildlife living within it. And then we have habitat destruction. Perfect example, earlier stated, the ocean acidification. Ecosystems collapse as a result of global warming and climate change itself, right? Because everything is getting warmer and all the climates are changing, all the plants and animals are reacting differently to the temperature. Perfect example, our polar bears at the North Pole. The ice is melting, so their ecosystem is on the brink of collapse. Why? Because if they don't have somewhere to live, then they'll die. And we found out in habitats an extinction earlier, like last week, that if an animal doesn't have a place to live, then it's going to die. It can adjust, it can adapt in some cases, but for a majority of it, losing its habitat can contribute to its extinction. So biodiversity loss, meaning we have species extinction. So as we stated before, some species may be lost. Intensification of extreme weather events, so heat waves, times get hotter. Do you remember what the highest temperature was recorded? Do you remember the highest temperature that was recorded in Jamaica last year?
Did you say, Miss?
The highest temperature on record in the history of Jamaica.
I'm not
Does
sure.
anybody
100
know it?
degrees something Fahrenheit?
Well, no. Last year, I think in June, the highest, and this is last year, just goes to show that climate
I
change is
know.
affecting us now. Last year, the temperature was recorded at 39 degrees Celsius, and you're probably like, hey, that's not a lot. But what temperature is it right now? It's probably like 32 to like 33 probably right now, and it's moderately warm.
Let me
And
check.
when it gets warmer, oh, you can go ahead and check, yeah. When it gets warmer, we do feel it. There are some days where you're in Jamaica and you're like, wow, the sun is so hot. How can this be? How am I not collapsing and all of that?
Right
And
now in
there's also
Portmore,
times
Jamaica,
when,
Miss. Right now in Portmore, Jamaica, it's 90 degrees.
oh, Fahrenheit. Well, I mean degrees Celsius. Can you get it
Degrees,
in degrees Celsius?
78 degrees.
28
78.
degrees Celsius?
Yeah. I'm not sure. You look
No, I
for
don't think
yourself.
that's degrees Celsius.
This is what I have, Miss.
Oh yes, 32 degrees Celsius. It's usually in Jamaica. Around this time. It's usually 32 to 33. And if you're in like Manchester, have you ever been to Manchester and the place is just extremely cold? But then when you look at the thermometer, it's like just 20 degrees.
Miss,
Every
what I
degree,
see is 28 degrees Celsius.
28 degrees Celsius in Portmore.
In Kingston.
In Kingston, I guess where you are is a little cooler than where
Yeah.
Daniel is. But okay. But I'm stressing how the temperature changing by even 1 degree can affect places on a larger scale. I mean, it's incredible. So glacial retreat, as we stated earlier, when ice starts to melt, they melt. Yeah, large bodies of ice are called glaciers. Yeah, and when they start to melt, they retreat, and that leaves certain animals out of somewhere to live on. Freshwater loss and desertification. How is freshwater loss? When they become acidified, we don't have much, or when the greenhouse gases are contaminating them, or pollution or other sources that contribute to the greenhouse effect. And desertification, when some places get too hot, it can lead to it not being able to produce anything. No trees can grow there, no animals can grow there. So some lush areas can become deserts as a result of climate change. Sea level rising and coastal submersion. I'm pretty sure we've heard about sea level rising if we haven't heard of anything else. And can anybody give me a perfect example of sea levels rising, the sea level rising affecting Jamaica? Anybody? It's a beach that we all know and love.
Hellshire Beach.
Yes, Hellshire. In recent years, Hellshire has been popping up on our TV, and we notice that it's not as, beautiful and glorious as it used to be. When we look at it, it's, you know, kind of depressing. All of the sand is going away, the sea is coming in more, and that is because of one, coral reef destruction, and also you can attribute it to sea level rising as well. Coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is as a result of increased temperatures and also pollution, and that's another thing that contributes to um, sea level rising. If there's no corals to kind of act as a barrier between shallower waters and deeper waters, then it would be easier for waters to just, affect the shore. So yeah, and the feedback. Okay. Oh yeah, and this one really affects humans because of the increased temperature. Disease carriers and pest propagation increases. So, perfect example. Earlier this year, did anybody hear about the killer locusts that were, flying? Well, they weren't killer locusts, but the locusts that were flying over Africa and they were flying over Asia, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is a plague, and 2020 is playing a game with us. Did anybody hear about those locusts?
Yeah, I heard of them. They attacked Africa.
So that's a perfect example. I'm pretty sure they've never seen locusts that bad before. In previous years, um, locusts have appeared, but not in the large numbers that they have. So the change in temperatures affected the change in which the animals breeded. Perhaps they noticed that the temperature was getting warmer, so they decided that they need to, make their babies faster so that they can get from one point to the other, and that resulted in a large amount of them being, present in one area at the same time. So climate change changes how insects and other things breed, and that affects us because we know that as a result of them doing that, it affected the people's crops and they couldn't get food to eat. And also it has direct human impacts on our health. So as a result of climate change, all the things that are affecting our environment, it is inevitable that is going to affect us as well. Yeah, those insects can eat your garden in a minute. It is inevitable that it's going to affect us as well. For example, again, in Hellshire, they have a lot of businesses along the coastline. But as the sea levels are starting to rise, people have to be thinking about moving their businesses. And when you move a business or when you completely take down the business, you lose money. There are some islands, even in the Pacific Ocean, that are being totally swallowed up by the ocean. You could say they're sinking, but it's not. It's the ocean that's rising, where people, when it rains too hard, the streets are flooded. You see the cars driving through the water, and the people, they don't want to leave, but they have to leave. They have to leave. And persons who are driven out of their environments because of climate change, they're called climate refugees. So you've heard of refugees of Afghanistan and refugees of war and a lot of other refugees, but no, people are becoming refugees of the climate. Uh, Also, crop failure and farmland loss. Whenever we have, increase, whenever climate change, affects our agricultural industry, we see a decline in food that's produced, or sometimes we see an uptick in the food that's produced, but the farmers can't sell off everything. And even here in Jamaica, I'll use a perfect example. In past summer months, we had droughts. We had severe droughts. We had droughts so bad that farmers couldn't even water their plants. We had drought so bad that we couldn't even get water in our pipes. We had drought so bad that the water within the Hermitage Dam was so low that everybody was worried about it. And that was as a result of climate change. I don't think Jamaica hasn't had as bad droughts before the 2000s. Like it never happened. Climate change is affecting us, and it's real. It is really real. Next slide, please. Took some time on this slide. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, the effects. We have stronger hurricanes, crop failure, fresh water scarcity, more frequent floods, more droughts, mass extinction of species, and climate refugees increase. So, next slide, please. Oh, causes and effects of climate change, National Geographic. Oh, so we can watch this video. Can you please copy the link and paste it into YouTube?
Just give me a
Well,
moment.
I know.
Human activities, from pollution to overpopulation, are driving up the Earth's temperature and fundamentally changing the world around us. The main cause is a phenomenon known as the greenhouse effect. Gases in the atmosphere, such as water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, let the sun's light in, but keep some of the heat from escaping, like the glass walls of a greenhouse. The more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the more heat gets trapped, strengthening the greenhouse effect and increasing the Earth's temperature. Human activities, like the burning of fossil fuels, have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by more than 1/3 since the Industrial Revolution. The rapid increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has warmed the planet at an alarming rate. While Earth's climate has fluctuated in the past, atmospheric carbon dioxide hasn't reached today's levels in hundreds of thousands of years. Climate change has consequences for our oceans, our weather, our food sources, and our health. Ice sheets, such as Greenland and Antarctica, are melting. The extra water that was once held in glaciers causes sea levels to rise and spills out of the oceans, flooding coastal regions. Warmer temperatures also make weather more extreme. This means not only more intense major storms, floods, and heavy snowfall, but also longer and more frequent droughts. These changes in weather pose challenges. Growing crops becomes more difficult. The areas where plants and animals can live shift, and water supplies are diminished. In addition to creating new agricultural challenges, climate change can directly affect people's physical health. In urban areas, the warmer atmosphere creates an environment that traps and increases the amount of smog. This is because smog contains ozone particles, which increase rapidly at higher temperatures. Exposure to higher levels of smog can cause health problems such as asthma, heart disease, and lung cancer. While the rapid rate of climate change is caused by humans, humans are also the ones who can combat it. If we work to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources like solar and wind, which don't produce greenhouse gas emissions, we might still be able to prevent some of the worst effects of climate change.